Hello, hello. Wow, it's a full crowd. We're going to get started in a sec. I just wanted to say welcome to Crossroads. My name is Samantha Coyne. I am the executive director here. And we're thrilled to be hosting the League of Women Voters, as well as hosting this big stink panel. Woo! Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone Crossroads is a nonprofit and that we're open to all thanks to our amazing supporters. Crossroads aims to inspire environmental stewardship in learners of all ages and all backgrounds. Crossroads prides itself as a safe place, and that's a really important thing, especially as we talk about education. In order to maintain this space, we ask all attendees and all panelists to treat each other with respect, and I know you guys will, so enjoy. Here you go, Virg.
Thank you. Well, I'm Virg Timmy. I am the chairperson of the Natural Resources Committee for the League of Women Voters, Door County. And so welcome, everybody. I'm going to read this because it's long and I have not memorized it. So first of all, thank you so much for your interest in this topic. I know it's kind of a stinky one and sometimes a little contentious, so I'm really glad to see all you people here ready to learn and listen. And thank you to the Crossroads at Big Creek for hosting us. We join them in their efforts to promote awareness of our environment and acknowledging the First Nations people who are the original inhabitants of the region, having ancient historical and spiritual connections to the land the Crossroads preserves now, and the land and water they now steward. So for those of you who are not familiar with the League of Women Voters of Door County, let me share a little bit about us. We're a local chapter of women and men who are part of a larger state and national organization. We are a curious bunch, and we enjoy digging very thoughtfully into issues from voters' rights and awareness to community health to social policies and much, much more. And sometimes we get ourselves into very deep doo-doo, and sometimes we like it. And so here we are tonight. So a year ago, a little bit of background, a year ago, Christine Reed of the Friends of Forestville Dam asked our group to look into the manure spreading regulations to see if we believe that Door County should adopt the same regulations as Kewaunee County has. Now, some of you may remember that not too many years ago, Kewaunee County was plagued with serious drinking water pollution due to dairy cattle. Kewaunee County is home to more dairy cattle than any other county in the entire state. It has 5 times as many cows as Door County. And manure mismanagement was polluting the wells. So, and members of that group were concerned that the same thing might potentially happen to Door County, and they were concerned. Well, we started our project by setting the 2 sets of codes side by side, reading them line by line, and found them to be virtually identical, except that Kewaunee County prohibits liquid manure spreading between January 1st and April 15th. And according to Davina Bonas, who is the head of the Kewaunee Water Conservation Office, that prohibition predates current codes by several years. It's still on the books, but it's been functionally replaced by the current code that both counties now follow, which prohibits spreading of manure on frozen or snow-covered fields. So as our committee drove further into this topic and as we educated ourselves about manure regulations and water health in Door County, we thought it would be valuable to share what we learned with the public. And that's why we're here tonight. We learned that the world is running out of phosphorus deposits. And phosphorus is a chemical element that is essential to growing healthy foods. The once vast global resources that are expected to be depleted within the next few decades. But manure contains phosphorus, as well as nitrogen and other essential elements. It's a natural organic product, it's readily available, and it's one that has been used to grow healthy crops for generations. So manure fertilizer can help keep humans healthy by giving us rigorous plant growth. Anyone who consumes dairy products or meat or pasta or bread, eggs, tofu benefits to some degree from the waste of farm animals. But overspreading manure can harm ground and surface waters, potentially compromising the very health that it is supposed to be supporting. So manure and its production and management is a vital human challenge. Our choices are either eat less, discover non-phosphorus ways to grow healthy crops, or figure out how to properly manage manure and other phosphorus fertilizers so they don't harm us, or all of the above. So our committee study led us to many experts in the community, and 6 of them are sitting here tonight, ready to share their knowledge. They'll educate us on the current status of manure management and water safety, update us on some very interesting and progressive farming evolutions and regulations, and share with us concerns and thoughts that we must consider as we move forward. Now, all of you were told at check-in tonight that we'll be taking comments and questions from the audience only in writing, and we're doing this because we have a lot of ground to cover tonight, and honestly, we don't have time for interruptions. So please write your comments and questions on the paper given to you at check-in, pass them to the middle aisle, and at the end of each segment tonight, we will collect those, we'll read those at the end of the program in the Q&A sessions. And if we don't have a chance to get to every single question or comment, we will be sure to follow up on those. We'll get answers for them, and we will include all those questions and comments in our final report that's due to be completed this summer. So thanks again for being here, and with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Marianne O'Dowd. She's a member of the League's leadership team, and she will introduce our guest speakers. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you. As Verge mentioned, there are segments to tonight's presentations. 3 of them. The first we'll hear from our farming community, representatives from the farming community, then we'll hear from the regulatory community, and then the environmental community. So I'll introduce everyone at the start of each of those segments, and the questions will be collected after each one of those groups of speakers have a chance to talk. So first, we have Duane Ducat and Jeremy Heims, who are owners of multi-generational family farms in Kewaunee County. Duane was a founding member of the Peninsula Pride Farms, and in 2022 he received the Outstanding Dairy Farm Sustainability Award from the Innovation Center of the U.S. Dairy. This award recognizes dairy farms and related businesses that demonstrate outstanding economic, environmental, and social benefits, and a long-standing commitment to continuous improvement, and a replicable model to inform and inspire others in advancing dairy sustainability and leadership. He started working at Deer Run Dairy when his father purchased the farm in 1984, and he now owns and runs it with his son, Derek. Jeremy owns Heims Hillcrest Dairy in Algoma and operates both the farm and a nutrient application company called Heims Brothers Custom in Kewaunee and Door County. Heims Hillcrest Dairy is a really fine example of the evolution of family farming. Jeremy's grandparents purchased the farm nearly 60 years ago with just 30 cows, and the farm has continued and grown through 4 generations. In 2015, Jeremy and his brother started an additional venture called Heims Brothers Custom, which provides crop harvesting, manure transport, and other trucking needs. Jeremy is a licensed nutrient applicator and the newest board member of Peninsula Pride Farms. And quickly, a little bit about Peninsula Pride Farms. It was founded in March 2016 with 35 Kewaunee and Southern Door farmers who got together to develop a vision for better farming. Its mission states, quote, "As farmers and caretakers of the environment, we are committed to protecting, nurturing, and sustaining our precious soil, water, and air." Their philosophy reads, quote, "Our culture is one in which farmers are empowered to continuously improve on the practices that affect the environment. Through peer-to-peer mentoring and other forms of support, we challenge ourselves to be models of sustainability. Goals and expectations are high, and so too is our commitment to each other's success and the well-being of our community." Please welcome Duane and Jeremy.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Okay, what are we going to do So a little bit about our dairy. We milk about 1,800 cows. We have 250 dry cows, and I was told to explain dry cows are cows on vacation getting ready for their next lactation. We built the dairy in 2008. It's about 7 miles off of Lake Michigan. We farm about 2,500 acres. Along with that, there's some very shallow soils in our area, close to bedrock. We don't have too many, but they are there, so we have to deal with that. So at our farm, we take a whole farm approach to sustainability. We accept all the challenges that come with changing environments, changing the way we do things. We have a manure digester, which helps out with the manure that we produce. It's like a pasteurizer for manure, per se. It makes the manure more bioavailable for the crops during the growing season. This slide was covered very well. So with our sustainability groups, Peninsula Pride Farms, Kewaunee Demo Farms Network, and Farmers for Sustainable Food, we all work together. With what we've accomplished over the last few years, we've reduced CO2 by 11,000 tons. We've reduced sediment by 65,000 tons. And we've reduced phosphorus by 10,000 pounds of elements that did not leave the fields due to our practices. So early on, this is one of the practices we experimented with. This is a field that we seeded rye in the fall just to see what it would do. It was new at the time. This was in 2016. And in the spring, we worked some of it in, but we kept the strip, rolled it down, and planted corn into it to see how it would work. You know, we had never done it before, so we were concerned with how it would work with the planter, and so we rolled it. We planted in the same direction that we rolled it, and what you see there is what was left in the fall. So that ground is covered. It has a lot of benefits to being covered. It keeps it cool. It keeps erosion from happening. And right here is where we would have worked it in. It was tilled into there. That's the difference between the soil at the end of the year. This is another practice that we tried. We co-seeded soybeans in the early spring, and on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see the corn, how the corn has stayed green. On the left, the corn is drier. This just looks like a healthier plant, and it shows that the water is conserved in those areas much better. This is an example of a field that we plant cover crops in the fall, and in the spring we apply manure to it early in the spring, and the manure is taken up by the crop relatively quickly. It stores those nutrients until we're ready to terminate the crop. So that's what the crop looked like in earlier April 22nd, and here we are May 12th, we're planting green into that crop. So if you can imagine a heavy rain coming down at that time, or any time during that time frame, that ground is protected and that water is going to be conserved. It greatly improves water infiltration. So it's a practice that we've been doing for years now, and it works really well. It comes with problems. you know, the planter acts a little differently. You know, there's always a reaction to something that you do differently, but we were able to manage it. So this would be that same field in June, and you can see the cover crop is broken down, and the biology really works well on consuming the nutrients that are in that cover crop. This is an example of interseeding. So when the corn is at, I don't know, V5 or so, we would go in and use an interseeder to establish a cover crop so that in the fall, when we take the crop off, we're to it right away and that crop is growing. We won't have to wait to start before we can apply manure to suck up the nutrients again. What we did learn with that is those plants, when you're in the field with semis, they can become very deal with any kind of a grade. It can be a problem. So like I said, for every thing you do, there's always something else that comes along with it. That's what that field looked like after harvest. So the ground is protected. There's a green growing plant there ready to take off, and you can apply nutrients to it, and it's ready to go. Here's another example of planting green. This was last May. It was a little bit later, May 24th, and you can see the amount of biomass that's there. Now, the university has come out and said that it takes about 2 tons of biomass to get to the point where you can expect decent weed suppression. You know, because that lays down and it covers the ground and it suppresses some weed growth. And you can see in this picture, this is the part that is annoying because you can't see that corn coming through there right away. And your neighbor's farm that's conventionally tilled, you can row that corn immediately. Here you can't see it and they're all thinking you're crazy. But this, you'll see in the next slide, it does work. So that's that same field, July 12th, and this is September 18th. You can see the ground is still protected, still covered. And that if you let the covers get older, it takes longer for that biomass to be broken down. If the cover is younger, it goes away faster. So sometimes I think you can utilize, if you've got older stuff, and it'll be there even the next year. So if you've got a mixture, would be the best to have something that breaks down faster and others that's slower. At 23 was a real challenge because it was so dry. So early on, that corn was really slow to come out, and we were like, oh boy, you know, is this going to work? Well, it was tough early, but in July we started getting spurts of rain. It was amazing that the corn hung on like it did. And in August we got 4 inches of rain. And this is a 24-ton per acre corn silage field, and you can still see all the residue from the cover crop down below. I had a field right across the road, planted same day, same variety, and I wish I would have taken a picture. Early on, it looked really good, and come harvest time, I expected it was gonna, you know, be a much better crop than this. It wasn't. It was just the opposite. That crop was uneven, and just the low spots were green. I was totally surprised by how this turned out. So it made me, it gave me more confidence in what we're doing than what I had before. Even in that dry year, it worked out really well. So this is an example of letting the cover crop get a little older. And we roll it down with a roller and plant into it, or this may have been already planted. So then it stays down. We're getting to the point where we want to try and terminate it without chemicals. We're not there yet, but it's got to reach anthesis before you can do that. We have thermometers in the ground the part of the field where there was no cover or it drowned out or something. The temperature here was 100 degrees. The temperature where it was covered was 87 degrees. And I think anything over like 85 degrees, the soil getting warmer, that's no good for the corn. So the covers are they're conserving moisture and keeping the ground cool. Not everything works. We're trying to make things easier, and that's not always that doesn't always work. This is a cover that was co-seeded, planted at the same time as the corn. And in 22, it was a little cooler in the spring, and the covers took off, and the corn was a little slow. So we had to terminate that cover. But that's part of what we do as a group. You know, we're trying to learn what works and what doesn't work. We're still dabbling with it because it's easy, but we haven't found the right combination yet. So we try. As a group, we're trying a lot of different things, including grazing, interseeding, low disturbance manure, establishing different cover crops. That's all part of our innovative practices. So one of the other things that we've started doing is terminating alfalfa before the last crop would be harvested, and then we go and plant a multi-species cover. Because when you terminate the alfalfa, it releases nitrogen, so we put a cover crop in there to utilize that nitrogen, and then that same fall, we're able to put manure on there, and the next year, it's good. It's ready to plant corn into. And if you look at that, all the worm castings, it's amazing how that crop is the next year and how fast the biology takes care of that cover crop. And you'll see that even the second year after. We do this after wheat when we are going to put that into hay. And when we terminate the alfalfa, we get those multi-species in early, and we really get a benefit of that. So this is why we like cover crops and no tilling. Because fall of 18 and 19 were terrible. It was mud. It's fun the first day, that's it. And this guy's not happy either. What happened here? Okay. Well, yeah, manure is the best fertilizer, like was explained earlier. It's organic. It's basically recycling our product. It's a full circle. You know, the cows eat, the cows poop, it keeps going around and around. That phosphorus is recycled. So this was a picture that came from the National No-Till Conference. The field on the left was in no-till cover crops, planned grazing management, and the field on the right is a conventionally tilled small grains, no cover, no grazing. 5-inch rain, 143,000 gallons of water stored per acre, 16,000 gallons of water stored per acre. Infiltration rate, 6 inches per hour, 0.6 inches per hour. I was told that about a week later they got another 4-inch rain event, and the field on the left was still good. The field on the right was done for the year. So to me, this is more evidence of the great things that no-till and cover can do for us. Well, we talked about that. Now it's Jeremy's turn.
All right, Jeremy Heim, Hillcrest Dairy, Heim Brothers Custom. Our family, my parents basically built the farm in 96, actually, rebuilt after a barn fire. My brother Scott and I came back in 2000 as partners. Kind of just struggled our way along and weren't that great of a dairy. And in 2015, we had to make a decision if we were going to get better or get out. And so at that point, we knew manure was a problem for us. We were handling it poor. And we invested in some equipment, hoping to do a better job for ourselves and hopefully pay for the equipment by doing maybe a farm or two. By the end of the first year, we had 9 customers. We moved about 19 million gallons. We were still learning a lot as we went. By the end of 2019, we were moving 200 million gallons, and feel like we're doing a pretty good job. There's a lot of things we learn every year, but as you can see in the picture, from when my parents bought the farm to what it is today, and then a picture of our family. So we run about 1,850 acres. We cover about 25,000 with our customers, and then handle about 200 million. Just a couple slides that we show, like things that we like or differences of different applications so people can get an idea. The same day last year, this is on a non-CAFO. That is actually on a CAFO. I'm not trying to say there's a difference between them, but we do run about 75% on cover crops with a dribble bar on CAFO farms, and we run about 25% on non-CAFO farms. But you can see just working the ground. It's not our favorite way to do it. Sometimes we have to do it when we work the ground just to push a reset button after we tear a field up, or some guys want to do that for putting alfalfa in or different reasons. But our choice is definitely on the other side when we're green and not turning soil up.
That was one of the big things that we saw, was the dribble bar really improved versus splashing manure on. We really like that because we cover all of our hay ground, and I think that the dribble bar is very important for that.
So my opinion on the dribble bar is it sets it down gently. We're not spraying it or splattering it on, and it just seemed like it always wanted to run if we were panning it on, you could say. Where the dribble bar, we just have much better control. Just another picture of a couple different applications. This one's, they're both spring. That one was left in wheat stubble, just spring applications. Again, it stays in place. That'll take manure and put it right into the soil, where most of, if we have open ground, it just wants to run or just stay on top. That's okay, right? Just a couple more pictures, 7,500 per acre on alfalfa. We try to cover every field within 3 days of cutting. We just seem to have a lot better regrowth. But we have had customers that challenge that out to 8 to 10 days, and it really doesn't seem to hurt it too much. So we've had good luck with it.
Yeah, I think that is the dribble bar, because you're getting it down on the ground versus over the top on the plants.
So the key to what Duane is saying there is we're actually placing it in a narrow line, it gets to the ground and it just spreads out about 4 inches. So it's covering a lot less of the plant crown. Cover crops immediately after the chopper. To Duane's point about last year being dry, our family was ready to give up on cover crops because our cover crop fields really, really looked bad. And as we chopped fields, our list was about 50% was going to be cover crop, and the other 50 we'd till up because we were pretty frustrated with spring. And as we went through fields, the soil was so different in the fields that had cover crop, it was like we were in potting soil. And the guys driving the trucks were all saying it's smoother, it's just soft. So we just ended up getting more seed immediately and just kept the planter going. We still to this day, we're about 92% cover crops. The only thing that we're not putting cover crops in yet is anything we're going in alfalfa with this spring. But my goal is to mimic what Duane is doing and change that in the next year or two. Duane talked about the 4 species cover crop after like winter wheat or an alfalfa. It's by far my favorite. Usually we can lock on at 10,000 gallons to the acre. We can do 1 pass instead of 2. And usually within 300-400 feet behind, you can't even see the liquid put down. It's usually just a damp soil. I guess I have a story about one of the fields I've done for Duane. He'd send me to a field and I hated the field. Every time I'd skip it if I could. I wished it would rain that day so I could skip it. At about year 3 on no-till in that field, my son was applying and I was following behind him. And the way we have it, the nutrient management plan may say we can put 10,000 down or 12,000, whatever. And most of our customers say just you do what you feel comfortable with. So we start out at maybe 6,000 or 7,000. If the field is taking it good, we may move up to 10. And I was following my son and I kept telling him, raise your rate, get your rate up. 10 minutes goes by, I tell him the same thing. Another 10 minutes goes by and I'm starting to get a little pissy at him. And he comes back on the radio, he's like, Dad, I'm at 10. I'm not going higher than what we do as a company. And it was amazing to me because 300 feet, 400 feet behind the bar, it was gone. It looked like we weren't even applying manure. So, but back to this one, this 4 species, I absolutely love covering that one. I just drove past a couple of my fields on the way up here, and I can't wait to cover them in the next week or 2 here because they're just beautiful green, and I know what's underneath them for soil. Usually November, I think we might have that. That might be the one. Usually November is when we empty by Ducats, and it's my favorite time because it's like we're going to play in potting soil. Okay, so talking about technologies, this is a map that we can produce for any one of our customers. I know when we go to meetings, some people ask, why don't people share this? Why don't the manure haulers share this stuff? But we track everything. It's all weather, it's all rates, it's speed. How we did the field could be replayed. That way, if there's ever a question, we can answer it. We have everything we could imagine to track. We track phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, dry matter, gallons. It's all tracked as we go. And it's all live. We can't change anything. I could show anybody any day what's happening in our field right now. So I just put on here just sometimes what we get is a little bit challenging for us. So this field is really, really close to here, and some people chuckle because we've had to deal with this field in the last week or 2. But we did a lot of rock verification with Door County and making sure what was right to go in. So the left one is the map I got. And us as a company are trying to go to the middle one is the new smart maps from Snap Plus. So this will actually have our tractor driving on it. So when my son was out here doing a boundary on this field, he actually has it in his tractor live, and it just puts him right alongside of that so he can mark out the whole field, what we should be covering. The black area was verified that we could go in it, but we couldn't get it changed on snap maps that quick. So it was highlighted through there, and we had to work with that little area. But this is our goal this year in 24 to get all of our customers to be running with that, because it makes manure application so much more accurate and comfortable for us that we know we're doing it right, that we're in the right spots in the field if there's areas we need to stay out of. So if I drive close to that, it will start beeping at me, and then it starts beeping really loud if you touch it. So it's an exciting thing, and then you can see what we actually did in that field. That's a coverage map of a field that's less than 1,000 feet from us. So our company takes a model that work with the town, sheriff's department, DNR, land and water. We want to work together with them instead of fighting them. Do I always like what they have to tell me? No, absolutely not, especially when it's state patrol. But they got a job to do too. So I just put the picture of the bridge there. Some people, I mean, it's kind of new. It's just helping us bridge that too, where we're not using bad roads. We bought it thinking, oh, we'll use it a few times. It's been used a lot already this year, just for helping farms get to fields they need to, stuff like that. So if you see one, just be cautious, but it's plenty clear for you to pass under. Something different with our company is we track everything on our trucks too. So it tracks speed, it tracks hard braking, hard turning, anything reckless, and it'll immediately notify us. So when people call me saying your trucks are speeding, it's not happening. I can guarantee it's not happening. Nutrients are all tracked, and then yes, new in 24. Breakfast on the farm this year is at our farm. I encourage every single one of you to come down and take a tour, because we are going to try and do a lot of demonstrations of different water filtration, and we're actually going to set up our whole manure rig in the yard so people can actually walk around it and see how it works and what's going on, just so you can see it firsthand right there instead of being on the side of a road wondering what that is in your way and slowing you down in traffic. And that's it.
One of the things I'd like to compliment Jeremy on, I don't know how many years we've been working together, but things have improved on our farm since we've been working with Jeremy. He gets on it. When we want to get manure on our alfalfa fields, he gets them all covered, and that really helps us in our manure applications and not having to put it on in the spring and fall as much. You know, if we can get it on a growing crop, it's so much better. So thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Duane and Jeremy. Okay, I'm going to introduce our next speakers who are representing the regulatory community. Timothy Dahl of Door County Soil and Water, and James Salscheider of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Tim is a conservationist, and he was born and raised in Sturgeon Bay, and his Door County roots go back 6 generations. When I read that, I was just like blown away. He started working in Door County Soil and Water in 2020 after earning his degree in environmental science from Bethel University. He works with farmers and landowners on compliance with Door County agricultural performance standards, nutrient management, and farmstead and cropland conservation practices. James is an agricultural runoff management specialist with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and for the past 4.5 years, he has overseen and helped regulate CAFO activities in Brown, Door, and Kewaunee counties. And CAFO, in case people don't know, is an acronym for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations, and those are typically farms that focus on greater than 1,000 animal units. Prior to working with the DNR, James served for 2 years as nutrient management specialist in the Door County Soil and Water Department, advising small and medium-sized farms on their nutrient management plans, and performing manure hauling audits. And welcome.
All right, thank you. You just heard from the guys that farm and spread manure and are out in the field every day, and now you're going to hear from us who regulate that and also help to do it in a way that's successful for the farms, successful for the environment, successful for people, so that we have healthy farms, healthy people, and a healthy environment all together. So, because that's really our whole goal. Who's watching the farms? In Door County, the Door County Soil and Water Conservation Department is, particularly the farms that are under 1,000 animal units. Once it gets to 1,000 animal units, that's where it transfers over to the DNR and James' responsibility. But every farm under that, whether it's 2 pigs or it's 300 cows, that's our responsibility to manage and take care of and make sure that they're in compliance with the rules that we have here in Door County. So the rules that we have, and we call it Chapter 23, there's 9 performance standards that relate to agricultural operations, and most of them, well, all of them are environmental, some of them are human health also, but the ones that really have to do with manure are nutrient management, the phosphorus index, the Silurian bedrock performance standards, and sheet rill and wind erosion. So those ones we're going to focus in on, but there's 9 total that we enforce throughout the county. And we have the authority is actually given to our Land Conservation Committee, which is made up of county board members and 1 representative from the farming community. It sits on that committee as well. So they actually are the ones that are given the power by the state to do this, and then they have agents, which are the people like me and other people that work in my department, that are going out daily and talking to people and doing the enforcement and working outside. So one of the big things when we're talking about manure, we're talking about farms, is the nutrient management planning. So NMPs are required for all farms, whether they have animals or they're just crops. Vegetable gardens are required to have them by state law. Everyone that is selling some kind of produce, producing something agriculturally, is required to have a nutrient management plan. So, and in Door County, we have over 90% of people that are farming, submitting plans. Basically, the only people that aren't, maybe they have like 2 acres of grass. We don't have the time to go force people to submit a nutrient management plan for cutting grass. So, besides those events, pretty much everywhere is covered. Everywhere that's cropped, everywhere that's getting fertilizer and manure is covered by a nutrient management plan. And those plans, they take into account the major nutrients that are going down, so phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, and particularly nitrogen and phosphorus have limitations on what a farm can put on. So farms can't just put on as much nitrogen as they want to grow a crop, or as much phosphorus as they want to grow a crop, as much manure that's going on. All those things are limited in a nutrient management plan that's roughly based on the crop needs for what a crop can take up to grow successfully. The UW extension has put together a list of what crops need based on soil type, based on the crop, and that's what farms are limited to, except for a few exceptions, but that's pretty much the rule for what goes on. And a part of nutrient management planning are soil tests. So soils have to be tested every 4 years. Fields have to be tested, 1 test per 5 acres, so we get an idea of how much phosphorus is out in a field and can more properly apply manure that's going down. So we're not making really hot phosphorus fields, because phosphorus runoff is one of the things that contributes to algal blooms and poor surface water quality. So if we have less phosphorus in a field and just the amount that a crop needs to take off, then the chance of excess phosphorus running off and damaging our waters is greatly reduced. So that's why the soil tests are there. And then there's also setbacks for manure spreading, as far as how close they can be to a well or to creeks or anything, karst features. So if we have sinkholes, there's setbacks for those. Generally, nutrient management plans require that anywhere throughout the state. There's different requirements. But in our area and a few other areas in the state, we have extra rules There are the Silurian bedrock standards, which you can see most of everything that's green, red, or yellow covers the Silurian standards, which are extra rules that farms spreading manure in our county have to follow. Not everywhere has to follow those, but that would take a normal 50-foot manure setback on a well and bump it out to 250 feet. So we have this huge, that's 5 times the setback because we're in Door County. For most of Door County, we had the Silurian areas. There's a few areas that are deeper where those rules don't apply. But another aspect besides getting these plans, we receive the plans, we look them over, we make sure things are going well with the planning, but our office actually has the authority to go out and make sure that while farms are applying, that they're doing it in the way that they said they were going to do it, or the way they're supposed to be doing it. So we can go out and talk to the farm, walk the field, tape off measurements, make sure everything's good, and that's a huge part of what we do, particularly through the manure application season. We will go out and we'll do random audits, we'll drive around, see somebody applying, stop right then, we'll talk to them. Or anytime somebody calls with a concern about manure spreading, we send somebody there. Usually it's the same day. In a weird circumstance, it might be the next day that someone gets out there, but it's pretty much the same day. If someone from the public calls and they say, hey, there's a lot of trucks on the road, someone's applying here, I think someone maybe applied too close to my well, whatever the concern is, we go and look at it. More times than not, everything's great. We've checked it out. Their farm is following the rules. If they're not, we have the standards that we're enforcing, and we can go through a stepped enforcement process depending on what's going on. But we encourage anyone in this room, if you see manure going down and you're concerned about it, you have any questions about it, please feel free to give us a call. We're happy to talk. Sometimes we can just talk you through the application. And then if there's more concerns, we go out, we talk to the farms, we talk to Jeremy, Duane, you don't farm a lot in Door County, but Jeremy applies manure here, so you talk to him. But any farm that's going on, that's what we do. That's a big part of our job here, is to make sure farms are applying properly and keep people safe and keep the environment safe. So there's a lot of rules set to make sure that manure is spread in a fashion that's good for everyone. Another one of the things that comes along is the phosphorus index and erosion standards. Like I said, phosphorus running off of fields is not a good thing. That's not what we want to have. We want to keep phosphorus on our fields. Like Verge mentioned, there's a shortage of phosphorus in the world, so we don't want to be wasting it. And manure is a great source of that, so we want it to stay on the fields. We want it to be there for crop growth, crop health, anything like that. So the phosphorus index is required as a separate piece of the nutrient management planning. That's what it is. I'm not going to read it for you, but it's basically a calculation that says what's the likelihood that a field is going to be shedding phosphorus off of that field and into surface waters. It takes into account the slope, soil type, distance to water, a whole bunch of factors, and then it rates it on a number between 1 and 12 and says 1, not a good chance that it's running off, 12, this is not good. All farms over an 8-year rotation have to average at 6. So that's a pretty good standard. That 6 is, we could do some improvement, but it's not damaging very significantly. And that's what we look at to make sure that phosphorus isn't running off. That phosphorus can be commercial fertilizer or it can be manure, anything that's going down. But if a field is being managed appropriately, like having setbacks, having buffers, no-till, things like that, the odds are that manure is staying on the field the way it's supposed to, even if it's just commercial fertilizer. Either way, the phosphorus index will tell us that. Also, for erosion, there's a set value for all soil types of an acceptable erosion level, which is called T. All fields have to meet that level, so they can't exceed more erosion than what's deemed acceptable for the soil type. That again helps with the phosphorus runoff, because if your fields are shedding a lot of soil, that's where your phosphorus is. It's bound up in the soil. And if a field is over T, they can't apply manure because the thought is too much is running off of the field anyways, that it's a waste of the phosphorus that's there. So fields have to be managed to meet T in order to even apply manure to them. So there's a lot of rules involving manure applications and nutrient management. These aren't all of them. If you're really interested, you can come and stop by the office. I'll walk you through every single rule if you want to. I'm happy to do that. But there's a lot, and it gets very confusing. Because another thing is the soil test P strategy. Like I said, soils have to be tested every 4 years for the concentrations of phosphorus in them. And what we do with that is twofold. There's limits to how much buildup can go into a field and what can be applied if the levels, if they're above 100 parts per million, then applications can't exceed a certain amount. There needs to be a plan in place if it's less than that. But what we can also do is we get all this data brought into our office and we can generate a map like this. So this is the Anape watershed in Door County. And we can look at it and we can say, okay, there's a lot of green fields. That's good. There's some orange fields. Those are still pretty good. Red is getting high and purple's getting really high. So what do we do with those fields? Well, now we have fields where we can go out and we can talk to farms and say, we shouldn't put manure here this year. It's high in phosphorus. What is your plan to draw it down? Or we couple this with the erosion potentials or the phosphorus index for those fields, and we say, this purple field that's really steep and really erosive, we need to do something. We got to do no-till. We've got to do some buffers. We've got to put some grassed waterways in. There's things that we don't require people. We don't require anyone to do no-till. We don't require buffers at the edge of field. But those are the things that when we're looking at this, we have all this data, we can use it to say, you don't have to change all your fields because, jumping to no-till is scary. If you go from conventional to 100% no-till, that's way too scary for most farms. But if it's, hey, here's a field that needs some help, let's try it on this field, people are willing usually to do that. And then we can look at the manure applications that are going on in that field at the same time and see how we can improve these things because we get this data. So just real quick, this is just a real nutrient management plan, some of the data that goes into it to show the soil types, the cropping rotations, the tillage, the soil loss T, everything that goes in that shows us how fields are being managed and what's appropriate for them to receive. Here is the actual plan for what's going down on the field. Everything's accounted for these fields. You've got the manure that's accounted for, the commercial fertilizers that are accounted for, when they're going on, how they're going on, what rate they are. And these are, we hold farms accountable to this. You can't say we're putting 3,000 gallons an acre on and we show up and it's 20,000 gallons an acre. That's not the nutrient management plan. Unless there's a really good reason, we got to have a frank conversation. So that's what we get everything accounted for. Every drop of manure that goes out is accounted for in these nutrient management plans. So that's the county perspective on what we do for managing farms, working with farms, and regulating farms and how they place manure. The state has some other rules.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I am going to jump into talking about CAFO nutrient management requirements. When I first met with Verge, we started talking about CAFO requirements as a whole, and NR 243 can be pretty comprehensive and kind of overwhelming, so I'm just going to stick to some of the nutrient management requirements associated with CAFOs. But to start, I think it's best to define what is a CAFO. That 1,000 animal unit threshold Tim threw around earlier, to kind of define that as what is an animal unit. The best thoughts that I've tried to explain it is looking at live weight of animals. When you're looking at milking cows and they're running around 1,400 pounds, they're 1.4 animal units per cow. So the chart on the right, you can see how many animals you're going to need at each individual type of animal to be considered a CAFO. So the top numbers, you're looking at those milking and dry cows, those larger animals. 710 puts you at that threshold. You're going to see a lot of farms that are running that milking 600 herd. Those, we call them the 990 clubbers, the ones that stay right underneath that threshold, and they're able to stay out of that CAFO requirements. But that's not the only way to become a CAFO. We also have medium concentrated animal feeding operations, and those are identified as other animal feeding operations that discharge pollutants to waters of the state, and that's found in Category 1 and unacceptable practice. Typically, you're going to be seeing a large discharge of pollutants to navigable waters, or you'll see private well impacts, and that's kind of a way to fast track yourself into becoming a CAFO. CAFOs are regulated by the state of Wisconsin. Nationwide, that's not consistent. This all comes from the Clean Water Act. The U.S. EPA enforces a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, so NPDES, and they regulate large concentrated animal feeding operations in other states. Wisconsin was granted authority to regulate large concentrated animal feeding operations, but through the DNR. And we have regulatory authority under Chapter 283 state statutes. And then under that, Chapter NR 243 Wisconsin Administrative Code. That is like the manure Bible that lays out all the regulations that farms like Jeremy and Duane, they have to follow. And it's quite comprehensive. I always tell new permittees that if they have trouble sleeping at night, pick up 243 and you'll fall asleep pretty quickly. But that's my job, is to regulate that. In Door County, there are currently 200 farms with animals. There are only 3 WPDS permits in Door County, and those are SNS Jerseyland Dairy, Bry Cycle Farm, and Haberly Farms, which is the only one north of the Bay. In Haberly Farms, north of the Bay, that permit's kind of sitting stagnant. That one's going to be closed out this year, so by year's end, there'll only be 2. The CAFO process is how we recommend farms that are, the voluntary ones that are looking to expand, which in this day and age is quite a few of them. We request that they submit a preliminary permit application 1 year prior to their expansion plan. That gives the department time to set up an inspection. We'll do a comprehensive site inspection out at the site. We'll set a date for them to submit their final permit application, which is going to include their 180 days of storage calculations, which is basically the amount of waste storage capacity they have, and also a 5-year comprehensive nutrient management plan. So to get into the nutrient management requirements, before I get too off base, I could sit here and talk for hours, I swear, about CAFOs, and I only have 15 minutes, so we're going to keep it tight. This transition slide is something to take home. Top left is I'm actually doing my job. So for those of you who say we don't do our jobs, I'm actually out there measuring. I've measured too many setbacks to count. And the picture on the right is a little out of date. It says a total of 319 WPDS permits in the state of Wisconsin. Right now, I think we're running around 345, and then I think by the end of the year, we'll be around 365. So subject to change, but one of the things to take home is the Northeast region. A high density of farms in the Northeast region. We have a third of the CAFO staff in the Northeast region. Each of us are kind of hovering around that 25 permits per specialist range, which is a little bit higher than we want statewide, but we just do have a high density of concentrated animal feeding operations in this area. Some of the nutrient management requirements Tim already touched on. CAFOs are required to have a nutrient management plan that's written consistent with NRCS 590, and a lot of the requirements Tim talked about are also included for CAFO requirements. So what I'm going to talk about are some of the areas where CAFOs are required to do something where non-CAFOs are not, and some of the regulations associated with that. So first off the bat is the big one is manure may not run off the application site or discharge to waters of the state via subsurface drains, which are tile lines. And this requirement is for, and this is included in any rain event. Any rain event, unless it's greater than the 25-year, 24-hour rain event. With non-CAFOs, there's a little bit of leeway with agricultural stormwater. But for CAFOs, it's at any point unless you have that large rain event. Which I think in Door County it's 4.3 inches or 4.2 inches, and then Kewaunee County is the opposite. So you need a 4-inch rain event in a day in order to classify for that. Another big thing that CAFOs have to follow are the surface water quality management areas, the SWCMAs. We talk about that a lot with farms and trying to explain what a SWCMA is. It's a fun acronym, but there's a lot of intricacies with that. So a SWCMA for streams is anything within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark for streams. For lakes and ponds, it's 1,000 feet. CAFOs are required to implement certain specific field management practices when land applying manure in or near those SWCMA areas. The most common practice is the 25-foot setback we always talk about, and that's when incorporating manure. Manure is not allowed to be applied within 25 feet of the ordinary high water mark of streams. This also includes conduits to surface water, so we're looking at tile inlets as well as certain road ditches that lead directly to navigable waters. Other requirements are for surface applications. So we talked about the dribble bar. Those have a 100-foot setback requirement when it's on bare ground. But if your field is in long-term no-till, has a active cover crop or alfalfa field, and your application rate meets the requirements in the table found in NR 243, you're allowed to surface apply up to 25 feet from that if you meet those requirements. There's other ways that CAFOs can do it. They can be implementing some crop buffers. They can put in vegetative buffers and strips around these streams in sensitive areas to manage. It's basically managing nutrient loss via surface flow. Tim talked about like the PI index and the parts per million of phosphorus for CAFOs. It goes a step further when it's above 100. if soil samples come back and you have phosphorus levels at 100 parts per million to 200 parts per million, we actually limit the amount of phosphorus that can be land applied. Tim talked about the UW A2809 recommendation. For CAFOs, we do not allow you to exceed 50% of that. So we want you to be actively drawing down the phosphorus in that field with your crops throughout your crop rotation, and obviously meeting the PI index of 6 throughout that rotation. And if you get above 200 parts per million, we go a step further and just prohibit manure applications in that field entirely until that phosphorus level can be drawn down. Let's see, frozen and snow-covered conditions. This spring was out of the ordinary, to say the least. So we had, very little frost, very little snow staying on the fields. And for farms, they took advantage of that. And it raised a lot of questions, a lot of complaints. But a lot of questions came from it, and it was a good learning opportunity for both myself and this, because, we don't usually go through this. But for CAFOs, there are certain requirements that prohibit them from land applying manure in the winter. There's a lot of things that go into it, so it's kind of hard to walk through, but the biggest factor is the snowfall. And it's different between solid and liquid manure. And you're looking at the snow amount on the field at the time of application and then the method. So CAFOs can land apply manure. They can inject manure into 5-6 inches of snow. But they can't, obviously you're not going to want to surface apply that or incorporate that. But there are allowances for CAFOs to land apply that during winter conditions. And I should have started with this, winter is not identified as any sort of month period. We're looking at just field conditions at the time with frost and snow. The only time that there are actually months where there's spreading prohibitions is February and March, where we identify that as a high-risk runoff period. That's kind of that spring melt-off. You're going to get some rain events thrown in here more recently. We prohibit surface applications of liquid and solid manure when winter conditions are present. Even when winter conditions are not present, we do still prohibit the surface application of liquid manure. But solid manure, this is the one where farms took advantage of it this year. In February and March, you're allowed to surface apply solid manure if there's no frost and snow present. So that was the big one, where you might have seen farms taking bed pack spreaders and going out and getting rid of some bed pack manure in February and March. And that was the biggest question. I think at least half of my permittees gave me a call and asked if they could get started on that. I know Jeremy had a couple questions on that one. But that's just that weird spring. Typically, we're not going to be having those. You're going to be having frost in the ground. So if there is frost and snow present, there is 0 liquid manure and solid manure land applications allowed. When conditions start to allow, so this is one of the bigger questions we get to, is if there is no frost present and you can effectively incorporate manure, you are legally allowed to go and do that. I don't believe any Kewaunee County farms or Door County farms land applied manure or liquid manure in February, but I know some farms near Wrightstown took advantage of that, and they actually had some liquid manure incorporation events. But it was just a weird spring. Typically, we don't get those favorable conditions, but farms took advantage of it this year. Continuing on with some of the requirements that CAFOs have to face, manure sampling. We require farms to take manure samples throughout the year for both liquid and solid. Liquid manure samples are required 2 times per month per source of application. So if you're applying out of 3 pits in the month of July, you're going to have 2 representative samples from each waste storage facility. And solid manure storage facilities, that's 2 per quarter for each representative sample. So if you've ever seen during the last few public comment periods and public hearings, we've had those draft permits out and you see those sample points in the permit. That's where we're really getting at, where each individual waste storage facility is going to be identified by a sample point. And every time they land apply out of there, they're going to have to be taking samples each month that they're doing that for liquid and 2 times per quarter like I talked about. What we're looking for in those samples are the nitrogen levels, the phosphorus levels, and the solid percents. For liquid manure, we're looking at the pounds of nitrogen available per 1,000 gallons. And same thing for phosphorus. Solid percentage, obviously, and for solid manure, we're looking at the pounds of nitrogen available and phosphorus available per ton. So Tim talked about NR 151.075, the slurry bedrock targeted performance standard. CAFOs are also required to be following that. They also have other requirements prior to that. So even in areas where there isn't shallow slurry and bedrock, they are required to still meet the 2-foot depth to bedrock and 2-foot depth to groundwater requirements. Manure is not allowed to be ponding or migrating within the application site. So even if you have manure moving within the application site, that's considered a violation. Same thing with ponding. well setbacks, CAFOs are required to follow a 100-foot well setback. Non-CAFOs are 50 feet. That's in the non-shallow slurrying area. In the shallow slurrying area, it's a 250-foot setback. There are also pretty diligent reporting requirements required for land applications. This image up here, that's an example actually taken from Jeremy's nutrient management plan update, showing the daily log requirements documenting land applications. So the application date, the field ID, acres applied, manure source, going across the top line, those are all things that the farm is required to track every time they land apply manure. The biggest ones that I always look at are the acres applied. So we need the specific amount of acres that's being land applied with manure, and then that rate. Because that rate tied in with the manure sampling requirements, that's going to give us our nutrient application. And we're requiring them to document that on a separate spreadsheet, and then that gets imported into the nutrient management plan. When it comes to fall, it's that fall manure haul-out push. The CAFOs have a 180-day storage requirement where between October 1st and November 30th, CAFOs are required to meet a elevation in their waste storage facilities that gives them available capacity for 180 days. So that just gives them the ability to store manure and not land apply liquid manure throughout those winter months. How we implement this. So talking about here is it's kind of like here's the rules, here's the requirements, and how we actually at the department implement this. We require nutrient management plan updates to be submitted every year, March 31st. Any agronomist that works with a CAFO should have that date ingrained in their memory. And we also do in-field assessments and manure hauling audits to document in-field implementation of that nutrient management plan. It's one thing to put it on the nutrient management plan in paper, but it's another thing to implement that in the field. So I do quite a few manure hauling audits. Jeremy's seen me quite a few times. Yeah, I higher number in the state. It's in part due to the number of complaints I receive, which I do not, I don't hate. I love complaints. I love hearing from the community on it. I also do a lot of unannounced audits. Jeremy also appreciates that when I just show up unannounced. Whenever my name pops up on his phone, I'm sure he doesn't like that. But I also, I think it's a good way of getting out into the field, getting out and making sure that the people in the industry understand that you're going to be in the area. And then we also do planned audits with farms. So I've walked quite a few acres over the last 4.5 years, and I think it's been good. I mean, farms have been learning. That's a good opportunity for us to get out into the field, do some education on the requirements. But sometimes we see issues. And some of the issues, the most issues we tend to see when we're out in the field are setback issues. It's always something that pops up a few times a year. Is you just kind of have to deal with the educations of setback requirements. So farms understand that. Jeremy's talking about the new Snap Plus map that Ducat came out with, and I think that's going to be a really good tool going forward for farms to use to better have an idea, better understanding of the setback requirements that they're going to be having to meet. Additionally, better mapping. Like you showed that map, it can be pretty overwhelming, some of the features that you have on a map. So having a feature that kind of shows you where you can go, where you can't go is going to be really important. It's going to be a good innovation in the industry, I think. But yeah, we talked about the ponding and migrating issues with turnaround areas is always one of an issue, and it's a $1 million question to figure out how to handle turnaround areas. And then obviously we have the leaving field boundaries as one of the bigger issues. And then when we come to the NMP annual update that the DNR staff, CAFO staff are reviewing every year, some of the bigger issues we see are the insufficient soil sampling and manure sampling, and that's on a statewide basis. It's better in this region than in other parts of the state, so we're going through that education process and helping farms understand how to take manure samples, how to go through soil sampling with agronomists, and working through that. Like, enforcement is not the goal. The goal is compliance, and the best way to do that is education. Enforcement's a dirty word. We were talking about this earlier today. Enforcement's a dirty word. I wish it was education over enforcement, but in the regulatory community, that's just a part of the game. So, yeah, I think just to wrap this slide up, on the right is just kind of an example of correspondence. There's a lot of language in there, a lot of it copied out of NR 243. We always put in a paragraph at the bottom to kind of explain it and walk through it and how we can kind of alleviate this in the future. And Jeremy said he works with the county. Duane, you work with me. We talk. It's been really good improvement on getting communication aspect between the department and permittees. So, yeah, kind of wrapping that up.
Okay, for our next segment, the last segment, we're going to focus on water health from experts Sarah Fry and Dan Hoger. Sarah is a private water reporting and compliance enforcement, there's that enforcement word, right? Enforcement coordinator at Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources based in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. Previously, she was a private water supply specialist at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and also held a position as a group health cooperative of Eau Claire, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and United Health Group. Sarah was instrumental in the well testing program in Door County, and she'll be sharing her knowledge of not only the testing results, but also providing guidance on what homeowners can do to identify well water quality problems and discuss remediation options. Dean is president and executive director of the Clean Water Action Council. After 30 years of teaching, Dean earned his paralegal degree so that he could pursue interest in environmental issues and joined the council in 2008. The Clean Water Action Council is an advocacy group that has fought for environmental protection in Northeast Wisconsin since 1985. It's participated in numerous lawsuits and actions to protect human health and the environment. And among the many things they have been instrumental in doing is reducing wastewater discharge violations and in improving air quality in Appleton that was caused by the paper mill coal-fired boiler. So welcome. It's your turn.
I'm just going to throw everything all over the place. All right. So the big question. So what is groundwater? You could go with the obvious. It's any water that's not on the surface. It's in the ground, right? So it can be in the state of Wisconsin anywhere from a couple feet below surface to hundreds of thousands of feet below surface. It varies greatly depending on what you've got for your aquifer. So like you can see on here, in the yellow, we've got really permeable sands, soils, and gravels. Then we start to get down into the water table. On here, again, it's still some of those permeable soils and rocks. Then we hit quote-unquote impermeable bedrock. In Wisconsin, that's usually granite. It doesn't give you a lot of water. It's pretty hard and doesn't do much for you in terms of a well. So what's a well? A well is essentially a big straw that you stuck into the ground to get your water out. That is how the majority of people in the state of Wisconsin get their drinking water, is from a public or a private well. Those depths can range from some areas of the state where it's like 25 feet is their well depth to other areas, maybe you've got a 1,000-foot well. Door County tends to be on the deeper side. So what makes Door County different in terms of groundwater? You guys have a lot of karst. So that puts you guys at a unique risk for contamination from things that are happening at the surface. Other areas of the state don't have karst, so they've got a lot more ability to protect their groundwater from the things that are happening at the surface. So karst, as you can kind of see in that little image, are the things like the caves, the sinkholes, the fractures. They're all over Door County. Drive around, you can see the features. They put wells at a higher risk of being impacted. Things that we know about the karst, things we've learned in Door County. Door County aquifers, I describe them as a sandwich cookie model. So Door County has two aquifers. We've got the limestone dolomite in the upper, and that kind of cream in here, I think it's an ice cream sandwich, but that middle layer is the Makokata shale. It doesn't transmit water very well. It takes a really, really, really long time for water to go through shale. Shale is essentially a compacted and dried out clay. And in Door County, the Makokata shale separates our two aquifers. So what does that mean for us? That water is not passing from the top to the bottom. We've got two distinct areas. The karst features are only in that top layer. So if we've got an area in Door County where we're really concerned with the impacts of karst features really hurting those wells, causing lots of problems, we can make a recommendation that you run your steel casing, your straw, into or through that Makokata shale. because we know those fractures don't go through it. They stop there. Complaint in Door County is the water under the shale is not so great. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but it's safer to consume in terms of bacteria and nitrate. So what did DNR see pre-1970? So prior to 1970, we saw a high volume of coliform positive wells. Coliform is an indicator bacteria. It's in the same family as E. coli, but they're hardier and easier to culture. So we use them as an indicator to tell us that there's likely an impact from the surface or outside of that well. We saw a lot of wells with shallow casing depths. Those are those 30-foot, maybe 40-foot cased wells in Door County. And we had suspected geology and those older septics to be key factors in why we were seeing these high numbers of coliform positive wells. So DNR, or Wisconsin, has a Wisconsin well code. Not every state in the United States has one. Surprisingly, there's lots of states with no well code whatsoever. A unique feature of our well code is DNR has the authority to establish what is called a special well casing depth area. So those are areas in the state that we've identified as being at higher risk of contamination, whether that's man-made or naturally occurring. It allows us to require more extensive well construction requirements to be protective. The good news about Door County, prior to 1970, we had all those issues. We used that to establish, kind of early around 1972, the entire county of Door County is a special well casing depth area. The shallowest casing that you are allowed to have by code is 100 feet. So it ranges from 100 feet, there's areas with 140, and then there's 170. So that's county-wide, your range is 100 to 170 feet. And we do revise those every few years. Door County is in need of some adjustment because of the way the Bay and Lake Michigan are, we modify those based on the specific geology. So in here we've got, so Door County, I think it's Land and Soil does the water, Soil and Water, sorry. Soil and Water does a voluntary private well monitoring. So that's entirely voluntary. I think there's no real requirements for which wells they sample, but as you can see, they've been sampling since 2019, and we get around 150 to 250 wells, depending on the year. So some good things that we have learned or seen with this sampling effort is our special well casing depth areas are working. So in terms of coliform, across all of those years of sampling, we're averaging about 90% have no detect of coliform, so no bacteria whatsoever. And to go even further, E. coli, where we know there is a manure or a fecal impact, we're having no detect 98 to 100% of the time. So those higher construction requirements are working. Our wells are safer. In terms of nitrates, this sampling has shown that 70 to 80% of the wells in Door County across all these years essentially have no nitrate. We have 0 milligrams per liter. The next highest category would be between 10 to 18%, which is in the 2 to 5 milligrams per liter. For reference, the health standard is 10. So you're half of what the health standard even is. And in arsenic, 90% of those wells are essentially a no detect. So they are detecting less than 2 micrograms per liter of arsenic. About 5 to 10% of the wells sampled are in the 2 to 5 micrograms per liter of arsenic. The standard for arsenic is also 10, so you're doing good on that too. So the good news with this sampling and with those increased construction requirements are it's working. We have very few exceedances of health standards. So this is DNR data. So from any time you have your well worked on, whether it's brand new, somebody comes in to do work on the pump, they have to collect a sample. So here's our data. So The EPA's public water standard is 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate. We've got almost 3,000 samples in Door County and only 565 detects of nitrate. So only 19% of those wells even had a detectable amount of nitrate, and only 22 of those were above 10. For coliform, again, almost 3,000 samples, and only 450 were positive, so about 15%. And only 49 were positive for E. coli. So very few wells are being impacted by coliform and E. coli. So what's the risk? Some areas of the county have a higher risk than others. This is an example of another special well casing depth area where we decided that the 170-foot casing requirement in Door County wasn't enough. This area is around 260, and we are working to actively expand it. How we establish these are we find out there's a problem. It could be a manure spill that impacted a well. It could be arsenic showing up at a high amount in a neighborhood, and we start to investigate. And as soon as we can say this is a problem and this is how we can fix it and the extent of where it is, we can move to create a special well casing depth area. So we can always create new ones when we identify another high-risk area. So what happens if DNR suspects livestock impacts to your well? We're first going to talk to you. We're going to figure out what you saw, what's happened nearby. Has anybody worked on your well? What are you seeing? What's making you think that you might have a livestock impact? We're going to look at the weather, the geology, recent land use. We're going to call Soil and Water and we're going to ask them, who applies on these fields? Have they applied recently? Do you know of a problem? And then if we think it's most likely that you might have a livestock impact, we're going to come out and we're going to do additional sampling. We're going to do what's called microbial source tracking. So we're going to take that bacteria that's in your well and we're going to figure out where it came from. Is it human? Is it bovine? And I think the state lab is working on pig right now. So we can identify those. If it's confirmed to be bovine or pig livestock, it then opens up the potential for you to have well compensation. There is an income eligibility component to that. So there's a piece outside of my ability to grant you well comp based on your income. We can release emergency water. We can supply emergency drinking water for up to 6 months after the event. So that could be bottled water. That could be somebody dropping off the big Culligan tank for you to fill cups. I've even had to coordinate bulk water. So big 3,000 gallon tank in somebody's driveway with a pump to supply their entire house with safe water. And we will also help determine the best construction for a replacement well, or a fix if that's possible. And a note, DNR can always assist in determining the best well construction or treatment options, or what to sample for, whether or not there is contamination based on what you're concerned about. So what can you do? Keep your well in good condition. Old wells with corroded casing are not providing the good protection that you need. Repair your well when it's needed. When your pump installer's out there, your well driller's out there, and they tell you this isn't looking so great, maybe you should think about fixing it. Replace your well when the time comes. I know we don't always want to spend that money. It's a high dollar item, but wells don't last forever. It's 50 to 60 years, sometimes less. And test your well. Test it often, at least annually, and especially if you think anything has changed. You can call your DNR and the county if your well tests positive for coliform or E. coli. If your water changes color, yellows, browns, those are never good. If it starts to smell, especially if it's smelling like manure, give somebody a call. If it's foamy, it really shouldn't be foamy, but if it's bubbling, you should give us a call so that we can help figure out what's going on, because that's not supposed to happen. Let's see, is this next one mine or yours?
Actually, it's
That's not mine.
I think it's
Oh, okay. Well, that's not my slide. But some things to note. If your water changes colors, even if you just think that maybe something's off, go ahead and sample your well. An example that we have, when we go a couple slides back, this special well casing depth area. We're expanding it all the way to the bay, or all the way to Lake Michigan. The reason, a homeowner was making spaghetti. They thought their water had a little bit of a scum on top, but they weren't sure. They weren't sure, it didn't smell, didn't really look weird, but when they boiled the water, it had a little bit of a scum that they thought was weird. So they sampled it. We had livestock impacts outside of this special well casing depth area. So we were able to expand it. So we're in the process of expanding that out to Lake Michigan because we now have proof that impacts exceeded that little square where we originally thought it was. I'm going to hand that off to you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Well, I have to say that I started off doing a presentation or preparing a presentation that was about using local, state, and federal laws to protect the waters of northeast Wisconsin. But it didn't seem to have enough stink to it, so I changed it to this topic. So, is liquid manure a fertilizer or waste product? A lot of this beginning part of the presentation is based on, we seem to be rolling along here, is based on work by and presentations by Gordon Stevenson, a retired DNR field runoff specialist. So I think somehow we got onto, I'll have to keep up. So it is rolling along on its own, I think. Okay.
It was me. I probably hit a button.
There we go. So as Gordon and others have pointed out, we have an estimated 340 million tons of untreated liquid manure. This was back in 2003, data from that time that was spread in Kewaunee County. And during that year, that was more wastewater than what Green Bay was producing, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Detroit. And they produced all that wastewater, but they also treated it. So, I mean, if you did the math on it, some of you might have your phones out and you're doing the math on it. The idea is that it's a lot of wastewater. Is it fertilizer or is it wastewater? And is it treated? It's not treated. So, as Gordon has pointed out, a dairy cow produces enough waste that is equal to 18 humans. So he compares that to, in 2016, for instance, Wisconsin had 3.4 million cattle and calves, and he says that's equal to what Mexico City produced and Tokyo, Japan produced in the amount of waste. So his position is that it's time to reconsider liquid manure systems. And he has one idea in which manure is composted, and there was a really great example here in Kewaunee County of a farmer who's actually doing composting and had a whole compost system for his manure. So here are some examples that Gordon has shared when he's done presentations. So again, the question, is it a waste product or is it a fertilizer? If we were just to look at that 10,000 gallon per acre amount, I don't know why it's doing that, but yeah. So if we were to look at that 10,000 gallon per acre amount, we heard that sometimes is being spread. You know, that is quite a bit of waste that's being spread on an acre. So if we were to compare that, for instance, I spoke to Lee Kinnard once when he did a presentation about farming that was sustainable, and he was in this presentation, and I asked him, if you're spreading, if you're making all those trips up to, say, Forestville from your farm, and you're running all those trips up there, is that sustainable? And he said, well, if I wasn't doing that, I'd be hauling manure up, I'd be hauling fertilizer up there instead. So this very thin, it's a very thin, it's a very thin fertilizer. It's the 5% solution as Gordon talks about it. So it's basically 5% solids. It's not a lot of nutrient per gallon. So I didn't have a chance to point out to him that if he was going to put 250 pounds per acre of nitrogen to grow corn, which is quite a bit of nitrogen, that would be not much compared to the 40 tons of liquid manure that he'd be hauling up to Forestville. So that would be at 10,000 gallons per acre. So the solution to moving waste from barns, it's the 5% solution. Moving waste from barns by using clean water and moving it into manure pits is probably not a practical, sensible way of moving manure and storing manure. So then, if we're storing manure, we have to remember that, or if we're spreading manure, we have to look at these areas in karst. And the problem with this picture is that it's not really level, flat. Underneath the soil, various ways, and we have to remember that this manure can run down into the soil, and then it can travel laterally, for many miles. Some of this ends up in our bodies of water, and it can come permeate up through our bays and so forth, through springs, and then end up in our waterways. So even if it's being soaked up by the soil, if it's passing through karst, it can travel both down and laterally as well. So the idea here is that we have a huge impact, and this is Wisconsin CAFOs and EPA impaired waters. So we can see a lot of waterways in southern Door County and also in Kewaunee County that are impaired, and typically these are all impaired by phosphorus. So the idea here is that if we're using manure pits to store all this liquid manure, or simply liquid waste is maybe a better way to say it, the manure pits do leak manure, and USDA biologist Mark Borkhardt indicated that it was the #1 risk factor for contamination of a well was the proximity to a manure storage pit. And this did happen with a relative of mine who lived within a mile of a manure pit like this and ended up having all the wells in their neighborhood were contaminated. So it's a concern. The concern kind of frustrates people. What can we do? Like if you live in Forestville and you're on that route of all those manure trucks, liquid manure trucks hauling manure through Forestville or other routes, you can certainly be frustrated. The key, though, is that we have to learn to work together. We have to make progress, and this is kind of something that was shared with me, but the point is that there is progress being made, and as Davina Bonas from Kewaunee County indicated, there's a lot of progress because there's more hands-on walkthroughs through farms, more work with applying NR 151 rules, and the work that Peninsula Pride is doing. And I was really glad to see all of the cover cropping that's being done. You can see it when you drive through the country, lots of green. But I'm really excited about the cover cropping where we're rolling it down and not just using Roundup or glyphosate to kick that back. So one of the things that we can do is look at what are authorities that we can use. So a while back, Clean Water Action Board members petitioned the EPA under the Clean Water Act. But more importantly, we also petitioned the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act with a number of other folks in Kewaunee County because of the contaminated drinking water that was found there. So both of these are ongoing actions. They're still not completely wrapped up. But the Safe Drinking Water Act, that petition resulted in 15 months of meetings. And then after that, the DNR decided to form technical advisory committees to revise NR 151 manure spreading rules. So one of the points is that when you are trying to work with agencies, you need to be ready to shake hands and work with them. You can't be, threatening, you can't be accusing. You have to really team up with them, be a partner with these agencies. In this case, it was the DNR, and because that was our approach, we were invited to be part of the NR 151 Advisory Committee. And I have to say, that's why there's a 250-foot setback from manure spreading in karst areas, because I actually pounded my fist a lot about that, because we had so many cases where manure was being spread and it was running right onto people's property where their well was. So we were up against some good opposition. The DBA, Dairy Business Association, was there. Wisconsin Hog Growers Association was there, and a lot of other ag folks were there. So we were kind of in the minority in terms of environmental groups. So there were some modest changes. I mean, it wasn't like a super change, but there were modest changes that helped bring Door County and Kewaunee County into a place where there was a greater amount of protection. So we've also been finding that if we can intervene in lawsuits, which we have done in the past, we intervened with, actually we kind of sued the DNR to do more with the problems with Hall's Calf Ranch and the violations there under the Clean Water Act. The Wisconsin Dairy Alliance, that was a recent lawsuit in which the Wisconsin Dairy Alliance was suing the DNR, and we kind of got in on the tail end of that, but that's where groups like Clean Water Action Council can submit briefs, amicus briefs or Friends of the Court briefs to help determine the outcome of a case like that. We're also involved that's a little different than our topic tonight, but that's really a key issue. If we lose that, the DNR will lose authority over lots of chemicals under the spills law. So one of the things that we find is that open records laws are really helpful, both state and federal open records laws. And one example here is that when we asked for Kinnard Farms water testing of their digester effluent, that one cost us $100. But on the other hand, copies of CAFO permit applications are typically at no charge, so we can review those and review those and review those. They're very long and very detailed. So, so it's very important that you take the opportunity to comment, and we try to comment the Rice Cycle Farm permit that came up and comments. Lots of people commented there. The S&S Dairy, the most recent one, had additional permit requirements. The first time 5 years back had no changes in the original permit. So it's important that you take those opportunities to do that. The Assembly Bill 957 to deny local authority, that the Senate had no hearing on, and that was ended up being vetoed by the governor. So also, Brown County has talked to us about petitioning both the DNR and our legislature about lowering the phosphorus index. As we heard today, that average was 6, and they feel like it should be low. So the appeal to local governments, this is another strategy that can be used, and we did appeal to local governments on the variance that was done for manure pit, and we did get that manure pit rescinded. That, you know, if it's a variance, it's likely that that can be looked at in more detail, and maybe that all the conditions haven't been met. We were also able to get bans for manure spraying in 17 towns in Door, Kewaunee, Oconto, and Brown County. So the last thing, a couple of things I wanted to mention yet. Manure, we've been monitoring for manure winter spreading, and we did, the year before, there wasn't as much this winter. We did 200 sites last winter. And this is why I'm so glad about rolling the ground covers, because when we're looking at glyphosate as a way of not kicking back that cover, that's a lot of glyphosate and Roundup that can be used and end up in our groundwater. We did a sample of a lot of wells, and we did not find that it was ending up in the wells, so we're not sure what it's breaking down into. But that is a concern with all the lawsuits regarding glyphosate. So this is another thing that we've been supporting. We've run 2 managed grazing workshops. In those managed grazing workshops, we brought the local farmers, family farmers, into the workshop and gave examples of other people who were doing managed grazing. And it's something that you can support also by buying products from farms that are doing managed grazing, such as Organic Valley is what I was trying to think of. So the last thing I want to mention is that we believe that a 5-foot setback is insufficient, and that we need to do more. And this is an example of a stream in southern Door that obviously is right now. However, even when it's not overflowing the banks, the soil is tilled pretty close to the stream and not within the 5-foot setback, or within the 5-foot setback, I should say. So I'd say that if you want to do something, that might make a difference, you might start working on lobbying your soil and water, your county board, and the Door County zoning committee to move that setback to what they have in Brown County, which is 35 feet. And we've turned in several violations in Brown County, and as a result, we've ended up with almost a half mile of vegetated area within 35 feet of streams on both sides of the streams. So, and that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean and Sarah. So kind of last call for any questions. And then thank you to all of our speakers. That was great. That really covered such a breadth and depth. And then I'm going to ask our speakers to come up front here for the Q&A. You're in the hot seat here. Or if would you rather stay there? Okay, that's fine.
Your choice.
Okay. Those are comfier chairs, probably. Yes, all right, and then I'm going to hand it back to Verge to handle our Q&A.
Okay, super. Thank you all. We are running a little long tonight. Lots of information that, as I warned you about, and I'm really grateful that we didn't have interruptions. But we've got a lot of questions here, and I'm going to start with for Jeremy. What is the cost of all the technology used on Heims, and what are the plant species used for interseeding and other cover crops?
The cost for us were over $500,000 in tracking equipment, but I think it's the most valuable thing we ever invested in. So that way, I know where my kid is applying, what he's doing exactly. The customer can look and see exactly what we're doing. And then even better yet is when regulatory people come in, I can show them my phone and show them exactly what's happening in that field right now. And I encourage anybody that is challenging us or calling into these guys to stop at a field and talk to me or my son, and we'll show you what exactly is going on. I have nothing to hide, and that equipment allows me to share that and prove that to anybody.
Most of our cover after silage in the fall is cereal rye, but in the multi-species we have vetch, turnips, radishes. There might be a few little of clover in there. Just cereal rye mixed in, and that works really well. But we're always looking for different species. We work with Bill Paul Smith as a consultant, and he's always trying to get us to try something a little different to see what will be the best companion crop with corn.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to answer this, whether it's the regulators or... Okay, this is interesting. How do we know when manure spreading is allowed to be done? Like, if we are concerned, how do we know if it is during the allotted time? I wonder why I sometimes see spreading at night. Is it so they're not caught? And I've heard we take animal waste, manure from other states, Illinois, and spread it here. Is that true? And lastly, I understand Jeremy follows the plans and documents. Are all farmers this diligent?
I'll start, and then if someone else wants to go more. You might need to repeat them slowly as we go. But the first one was, how do they know if it should be spread at this time?
Right.
I would say call our office. That's the easiest way to know. Our main line is 746-2214. And you can call us, and we can tell you if it's the right time. If you have any concerns, we're happy to field those calls. But generally, if you see them working the manure into a field, so if they're going and they're disking it in as they're applying, it's probably allowed at that time. But if you have any concerns, just call. It's a lot easier because there's a lot of little variances, nuances in the rules, so it's a lot easier to call, and we can walk you through those and talk to you. We're happy to take calls. I know James is too happy to take calls. What else we got on that list?
Are we importing animal waste manure from other states like Illinois?
Not up here.
Yeah, I don't really have too much experience with that being up on the peninsula, but I mean, I'm not sure where the regulatory comes across because I haven't had to deal with it too much. Kind of to piggyback off what Tim said with like where he talked about incorporating it and, you know, obviously contacting it. I keep my phone on me at all times, even on the weekends, to field any, solicit any phone calls. I always value those conversations because they're always a great learning opportunity. But yeah, with importing, yeah, we don't deal with that too much up here. Not a lot of people trucking it across the lake, but.
And we had three different comments that were all kind of along the same lines. And in general, it's what prevents other farmers from adopting Duane's and Jeremy's nutrient management practices? Are all farmers doing this? And if not, why not? And would you like to address that? Anybody?
I would say when we first started looking at this, manure applicators maybe would challenge it because you go to, your rates will drop from 10, 12, whatever that might be to, 5, 6. So it's more work to do it, but we had to look at efficiencies and see how we could get efficient to do that and still stay profitable. For the cover crop side of things, I think it's scary because in our experience, they seem to start slow and finish really, really strong. So if you can get over that hurdle that my dad instilled in me, that it needs to look good on day one and maybe tolerate a marginal crop for a month or so and then it comes through, it helps me get through it.
I would go along with Jeremy there. I think our biggest challenge with the cereal rye covers in the corn early is to get that cover down on the ground as close as we can so we get sunlight to that corn crop right away and don't have to put up with that month of looking at ugly corn. So, but on the comment about bringing manure in from a different state, we at the Wisconsin Custom Operators Conference this year, there was a guy from the Netherlands, and he talked about how they hauled manure from the Netherlands 200 miles into Germany. So it's a good product if they're hauling it 200 miles.
I think we're going to take two more questions. You had one of those down here that. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this one is for Sarah. When will farmers have real-time well monitoring? Until our land and water departments have true numbers, we're only estimating how much liquid manure is being spread and if it's affecting wells.
So for real-time monitoring, many of the larger farms are starting to install a product called Well Intel. So it is a product that's installed inside their well. It monitors the changes in the water level, so where that depth to water within their well is and how it changes during the pump running, so when they're actively using water. So those bigger farms, often ones that also have high capacity well permits, are having to monitor their water use on the front end. So they need to know how much water are they pumping out of the ground and how much on the manure side is getting put back. In terms of sampling, some of that comes down to their permitting with the groundwater sampling. But if anybody is ever concerned about their well, it's usually $25, $30 for a coliform test. And you can run it almost anywhere.
Thank you. I'm just going to take two more questions here. This one's for Duane. How do you measure phosphorus that doesn't leave the field?
Well,
that could probably also be for Tim.
phosphorus that doesn't,
Okay.
well, if it's not leaving the field, it's in the field and it's in the soil test. That's how we measure it. But we do have edge of field monitoring working with the demo farms and discovery farms. So we are looking at what leaves the field there. I think this is, I think 5 years we've been doing that, and we had an area where we established a grass waterway, and we saw great improvement. We also noticed that most of the runoff that takes place is in the spring, when the ground is thawing and it's partially frozen. If you get a runoff event, that's when it's going to happen.
Well, and that kind of. Oh, go ahead.
There's also a lot of spreadsheets and estimates for particular practices in fields, so that if we'd say if we put cover crops on 40 acres, we're estimating to be keeping X amount of phosphorus on the field, because there's predictions for what would run off with or without a practice. There's a lot of math, a lot of estimates, a lot of research that other people do that we're thankful for to do that.
No.
I'm not a chemist.
Let's go to the last question here and kind of wrap this up. Okay, and this has to do with your rain event comment. It says, when applying liquid manure to a field and you see a liquid area, is that a violation? And if it is, what do you do? Take a picture, call DNR hotline. It will dry up by the next day. Is there any enforcement action required?
Yeah, I can field that one. Like I said, for CAFOs, there's a requirement to not have manure pond. There's no legal definition for ponding. It's really kind of to the eye of the beholder. I always use the definition for incorporation, where 80% of the manure that's applied in a given area needs to be covered by the soil. So 20% of that application could be seen on the top. I think the biggest complaint, besides the amount of trucks, is the turnaround areas on the field edge, because that's the area where there's not a perfect method to get it done without leaving a little bit on the surface. So there is enforcement discretion for turnaround areas. Obviously, if it's egregious, if we're seeing manure migrating 20, 30, 40 feet from that turnaround area, that's when we start to see those violations. And then from the department stance, it's really kind of the up to the CAFO specialist responsible for that permittee on how to take action on that. Like I said, we have a stepped enforcement process, starting with the compliance reminders, that bare minimum. Typically, that's what you're going to see for ponding for the first time. If it's something super egregious, you could see a notice of non-compliance submitted. Repeated history could lead to a notice of violation, and going on from there. But
Okay. Okay, well, we've got a pile of comments and questions here that we're not going to get to, but what I encourage you to do is, if you would like to access the report that's going to include these questions and comments this summer, please sign up on our mailing list, leave your email address, and we will alert you when the report is done. And so anyway, I want to thank our wonderful guests tonight. I think they did a fabulous job. Let's give them a really big hand. And thanks to all of you. We really appreciate your support, and hope you drive safely home. Watch out for the deer.